Hello and welcome to Sly Cooper Thieves in Time Speedrunning tutorial. In this multi-part series I'm going to give you a complete toolset in order to speedrun the any percent category and the individual episode run categories of this game. We'll refer to this game as Sly 4 from here on out since it's the fourth installment of the Sly Cooper franchise. This series will stretch through 11 parts. This is the first part of the series which covers the tutorial level, aka Paris Prologue, an optimal setup for running, version differences, region differences, language differences, and all the optimal coin routes for different scenarios. All strats from this series are up to date as of January 2021. Let's start with the setup and the devices you need in order to speedrun this game optimally. The speedrun leaderboards for this game are located at speedrun.com/sly4. In order to get runs verified for these boards, you need to have an official release of the game, and the run has to be done on official hardware. This game has officially been released to PlayStation 3, PS TV, PlayStation Vita, and PlayStation Now. This game has two main versions, the NTSC and PAL versions. Differently labeled versions do exist, but regarding their content, they are pretty much identical to either NTSC or PAL version. And from these two, the faster, the most optimal version is the PAL version. This is due to language differences that we'll cover in a minute. The optimal platform for speedrunning this game is the original PlayStation 3. All other platforms are slower simply due to slower loading times. In-game loads of this game are notoriously lengthy, and they are heavily affected with these other platforms. Both the physical and digital version exist for PlayStation 3, and the digital version that you can download from PlayStation Store is significantly faster than the physical disc version of the game. In order to get even faster in-game loads, it is allowed to swap the 5400 RPM hard disk drive of your PS3 to a faster one, and the fastest memory storage drive that you can put in your PS3 is a solid-state drive. PS3s use SATA3 port, and the speed of the console is capped to 300 megabytes per second, and when you have a quality SSD which has a read and write speeds above or equal to 500 megabytes per second, it means that you are consistently maxing out the load speeds that a PS3 console can give. Here are the time saves that SSD provides over the default HDD, so it indeed saves 3.5 minutes for any percent, so I recommend you to get one. They're pretty cheap these days compared to what they used to be when I started speedrunning. And the PS3 model that you have does not matter. If your load times in this game are noticeably slower compared to another runner with SSD, that might just mean that your console itself is just very bad and old and in bad shape and such. Then let's go to some of these settings. Let's go to options and game. On the PAL version of the game, you can select the language you are using. You can select the dub manually from the main menu. You do not have this option on the NTSC version. The NTSC version does have 3 languages in total though, English, French, and Spanish, and you can change the language on the NTSC version from the system settings. For the sake of demonstration, I will be using English throughout this entire tutorial series, but English is not the optimal, aka fastest language for all the categories in this game, and one of these is any percent. For any percent, the fastest language is always German, aka Deutsch, or Swedish, aka Svenska. In part 7 of this series we will go through why I definitively can't say that one language is faster than the other, but more likely, majority of the time, the fastest language is Deutsch, German. For episode 1 runs, the fastest language is Svenska, Swedish. For episode 2, it is Deutsch, German. For episode 3, it's the same thing with any percent. The fastest language is either, once again, Swedish or German, but this time it's more likely to be Swedish than German. And for episodes 4 and 5, it's actually English. And aside from episode 3, the differences are indeed very small. Let's go over to the controls. You can always go and change these to your preference before the run, although your last selected options will be saved every time you open the game again. So an any percent run of this game is always a new game speedrun, so you always have to choose that. And you can either create new save data or save over a previously made file in order to start the run. I have a few of these files saved up here for episode runs, and practice files that are quite handy, so I recommend you to also set up episode run files for each episode of the game. Additional rules can be found from this game's speedrun.com page. The fact that for an 80% run you always need video evidence. If you don't have a capture card, or if you have limited knowledge of PS3 gameplay capture, the community is very helpful with it, and I will link the community speedrunning Discord in the description of this video. So I will save over this file. It'll save, and now it would be the time to start the run. Here you will get an info pop-up box asking if you want the full story, and the timing starts when you press either yes or no to this screen, and optimally you would select no here. So let's do that. The first indication of a run that has started are the small black areas appearing to the bottom left and top right portion of the screen. This is how the fade out animation that is used pretty much everywhere in the game always starts. Both the fade out and the fade in animation last for 1 second, and at many times you can have free movement from the instant this fade in animation starts too. But since you can't see the majority of the screen for that 1 second of time, it does save a pretty hefty amount of time in the entire run if you know exactly what to do every time after every single load. That's why I'm going to have a large emphasis on that in this tutorial series. Even though this very in-depth tutorial is made relatively beginner friendly, I don't expect you to be beginners. I expect you to have at least a casual experience of this game in its entirety already, so that's that. So an 80% run does not have any requirements other than beat the game as fast as possible, so that's what I'll demonstrate. After the first loading screen of the run, this is one of the few instances where I don't recommend you to mash start button in order to pause the game immediately when the load is completed. But nevertheless, pause the game instantly after you see that the load has been completed, or you can hear the music transition from the main menu theme to Paris by Rooftops theme. Usually a small change or a cut in the music gives you an indication about when the load is about to be completed. Now here I believe I paused the game on the first frame of the actual cutscene cinematic. This caused a little bit of a glitchy pause screen with the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. This is fine though. Pausing on the first possible frame can result in you seeing a T-posing slide, and this means you pause too early, and if you skip cinematic, it will just load the cinematic again. So watch out for those T-posing slides, and if you actually see one, unpause the game and pause again. This game has a ton of cutscenes, and most of them are skippable with the skip cinematic option. The vast majority of all cutscenes that can be skipped are faster to skip with this function, and I'll inform you every time when this is not the case. So skip the cinematic by mashing X. After the load, hold up on analog stick. An info box will appear almost instantly after the load, but not quite, so you can't mash X from the load, or otherwise you will actually jump. Run about 7 or 8 steps forwards and you will come across another cutscene that you'll skip. Hold up after the load. Before moving forwards, let's go through slice movement and everything that you'll be using in the 80% category regarding him. So, speedrun knowledge. There are certain unit speeds that are coded in this game, which correlate to speeds that the characters have when they move. So here example, Sly's walking speed is relatively coded in the game to be 6.3. Sly's running speed, when you hold down R1, is coded to be 9.5. And Sly's jumping speed, single jumping speed, is 7.5. Double jump movement speed, 5.5. So that's slower than single jump speed. So in other words, avoid double jumping unless you are doing a circle input right after that, also known as a circle boost. And of course, pretty much always use R1 to run. Sly's triangle spin attack is pretty much completely useless in the run, and the mid-air cane attack also, it can be used in some very certain niche scenarios in order to, for example, cut down the upwards momentum of a Sly's jump a bit earlier. The only form of glitched movement you can do as Sly is a so-called mini-hop found by Furball a few years back, where you push square, triangle and X, or square, X and triangle, and this seemingly causes a lower altitude jump, but the air time is still exactly the same. as a normal jump. So it actually does not save any time. The dive spin move X plus triangle can be used when you're falling into a pit, either intentionally or accidentally, and you're trying to get off that pit as fast as possible. Or to cancel bad landings from high altitudes when you don't have paraglider, which is the case with all the ancestors. It's not RTA faster to cancel those bad landings. They actually break even RTA. But if there's some cycle-based things present, then skipping the bad landing can be optimal, since the bad landing also slows in-game time down by about quarter of a second. Also, one important thing to note with jumping in this game, that if you mash X, Sly will not do a double jump instantly, unlike in Sly 1, 2, and 3. So keep this in mind if sometimes you feel like you dropped an X input or something like that. It's not the case. But anyways, let's go. So hold up or slightly upright from the load, or slightly up left from the load. This little part is pretty self-explanatory when you have to look at the chopper in order to get moving again. But note that if you have inverted your camera, it will default back to normal if you stay here without looking at the chopper for too long. In fact, this will happen if Bentley has time to finish his voice line. Mash circle while dropping off the ledge, instantly do a spiral jump on the second platform and a single jump circle boost on the railing. Note that if you go too fast here, you will get spotted by the spotlights. Jump while circle boosting on the railing until you reach the cutscene that you skipped. Also, so that I don't forget to mention this, when skipping cutscenes, you might come across a situation where the cutscene hasn't actually started yet. The animation of the cutscene hasn't started yet, but you'll pause the game literally on the frame it starts, and when you pause the game, it'll say skip cinematic instead of restart checkpoint, and you might see the autosave icon on the place where it always is. This means that you can actually just skip the cinematic, and this was actually very optimal. You will just skip the cinematic, don't worry. But it's a different case when you get the autosave icon, but the menu text still says restart checkpoint instead of skip cinematic. This means that you got the checkpoint autosaved, but the cinematic itself has not loaded yet. So if you select restart checkpoint here, it'll load the cutscene and you'll have to pause the game again and skip that cinematic. So what to do when you get the autosave but not skip cinematic option that you were expecting? On pause and pause instantly again, and now it should have the skip cinematic option. Hold up from the load and wait Sly to land on the spiral point and jump off of that instantly and circle boost once again to the rail. Since this is the tutorial level of the game, this is also the tutorial into speedrunning this game, so I'll also explain circle boosting. Now, when you're walking on a rail, you can see that Sly is walking rather slowly compared to jumping speed, and this is why we jump on the rails every time instead of just walking on them. Later in the game we're gonna get a gadget or unlock a gadget called Rail Sprint, but Rail Sprint is not that faster actually compared to this rail jumping method, so that's why the power-up doesn't save that much time, but we'll get into that later in this video. So, circle boosting. Remember what I said about not using double jump? Yeah, use it as less as possible, but if you're pressing circle right after that in order to do a thief move, then the double jump input, the second X input, is just fine. If you press circle instantly, as quickly as you can after the second X input. And this is called a circle boost, and it's very useful in this game. Sly 2 and 3 have a frame perfect version of this that is utilized a bit differently, and in Sly 4 it can also be frame perfect, but it doesn't have to be in order to be extremely effective. So basically, to utilize this the most efficiently, just do the circle boost at the height of Sly's first jump. What I do is that I simply slide my thumb from X to circle as quickly as I can. This is a very, very commonly used movement tech, I guess. There's not very many things you can call movement tech in this game, but this seems to be a bit of an oversight since it can be used to execute several minor platforming skips. Now there you saw another thing in this game that's kind of notorious. If you jump off a spire point on the first possible frame after landing on it, you will perform a so-called frame jump. You will jump off that spire point, but you will get absolutely no height that you would normally get, so beware of them. There are a few minor instances where that's optimal, but most of the time they are just annoyances that happen accidentally. So the casual route here would jump down, but you can actually just jump on this wall here and either ledge grab or just clear the gap entirely without ledge grabbing. Now, next up, very important thing. Keep in mind this throughout the entire game. You saw this icon? That's the autosave icon. If it happens mid-gameplay, it means that you hit a trigger and the game autosaved that trigger. So Sly 4 is kinda same with Sly 2 and 3 in the sense that all triggers are pretty much chained. If you miss one trigger, you have to go back in order to advance. So you gotta know where all the triggers are, otherwise you might just pass them without even noticing it, and it'll result in a lot of time loss. The trigger on this roof, because of that little shortcut, it's very easy to miss, and so are several other triggers too. Okay, let's continue. Here Sly's normal wall sneak animation is also pretty slow, just like the rail walking. So also jump and circle boost these two.
Security is getting tougher, Sly. Steer clear of the guards and lights. Avoid sprinting around the guards too. They'll hear your footsteps.
I'll be a go.
From the load, hold up while mashing X and circle. Do a upwards cane jump circle boost on this pipe, and then double jump circle boost on this zip line. If you did this movement correctly, Sly is on the left side of the swing of his ziplining animation when the cutscene triggers. Now, what did I just tell you? Upwards cane jump circle boost, what the hell? So in order to demonstrate this, I actually skipped one of the triggers and went ahead on this pole with an impressive height and no collision apparently at the top. So yeah, on a side note, skipping triggers can result in a lot of out of bounds exploration. But back to the topic. Just like with rail walking, wall sneaking, and climbing, and pole climbing, Sly's movement is rather slowish. So once again, jumping here is the optimal method of movement, but I have to go more in depth with it. So a technique of cane jumping is also known in Sly 1, although in Sly 1 it can be done in any direction. In Sly 4 it's only effective upwards, and especially when the pole is straight. Like here. Nice displacement, Sly. Here's a side-by-side comparison of just normal climbing and double jump circle boosting while holding the left analog stick neutral. So yeah, clearly faster, but let's show one more side-by-side comparison. So what was the difference here? Why was that other comparison that did not hold left analog stick neutral so much faster? So it's once again circle boosting, but it's a bit of a different scenario. So the optimal way to climb pipes is that you back away from that pole on the first jump during the first X input of your jump, and then move closer to the pole with the second X input and the circle boost input. So away, towards, pull back in, pull back in cycles, and time inputs correctly. Back in, 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 back in. It's not even that precise in terms of angles. Let's continue. Skip cinematic, hold up from the load. You don't need to wall sneak on these platforms here. In many cases, the spotlight cycles in this game are just suggestions. They're quite ineffective, so often you can just run straight through them. Single jump circle boost on the spire point. Usually, if you can single jump the circle boost, it's faster to single jump it, unless you have to do, like on a long rail, a second circle boost right after that, or something like that. So as we come to the first pickpocketing section in the run, note that the same R1 tapping thing from slide 2 and 3 does not work in this game, so don't do that. So instead, when approaching the area where you can alert a guard with running, instead of running to it, jump to it. And do not hold R1 even when you land, not for a single frame, or the guards will always hear you. Build this knowledge into your muscle memory, since there are multiple pickpocketing sections like this in the run. A little thing to note here is that Slide's pickpocketing animation is the exact same length, regardless of how long distance away you are from the pocket you're trying to pickpocket. So logically, with this rat, you might think it's optimal to land approximately right within the distance where you can pickpocket the rat. Otherwise this would be optimal, but in this case we have to stealth slam that guard instantly after pickpocketing him. And as you can see, we are clearly out of range, so you actually have to get a bit closer than that in order to actually stealth slam the guard. Now there's another thing. You're still a bit too far, since another trigger loads after this. In order to activate it instantly after stealth slamming the guard, you actually have to be within the range. Let's see how much closer do I have to go here. So in total, I actually have to be smelling that rat's butt for the actual optimal play. It's kind of counterintuitive. So this here is a trigger that you activate by pressing circle. Common thing from slide 2 and 3. So let's see the entire thing from start to finish.
Press the circle button to pick his pocket. To perform a stealth flight,
skip cinematic and hold up from the load, but press X instantly after. Now let's go over Bentley's movement. So the unit speeds with Bentley are pretty much exactly the same, except for the hover pack ability. Speed of Bentley's hover pack is 6 instead of the double jump's 5.5. But it's still slower than the 7.5 of a single jump. So also use hover pack as less as possible. Bentley's square attack animation, when used in midair, stops his forward momentum. This midair square is only pretty much used when cutting bad landings. Right before the fall changes into the animation that will result in a bad landing. Now I've talked about some bad landings a few times, so let's show what it means. The stomp animation that happens when you land. This means that you landed from too far, and you'll get a landing animation that stops or like locks your movement. Here as Sly, you can see me cut that with a double jump right before it entered the bad animation, or with a triangle move. I don't think we used this normal bomb dropping animation a single time in the entire run. If we have to throw an actual bomb, we're gonna do it with the bomb throwing function that you trigger from L1. After equipping this function, just press triangle and you'll throw the bomb, but note that you can't throw the bomb before the green arrow has appeared. So this means you cannot store these bomb throw inputs. Like in slide 2 and 3, Bentley also has the adrenaline burst power-up, but it's quite nerfed in this game compared to slide 2 and 3. Unit speed of slide 4's adrenaline burst is 12.4 compared to the running speed of 9.5, so it's only about a 30% increase. Let's get going. Here you can see these wooden walls have bombing icons on them. This should mean that you should bomb them in order to get through them, but as it happens to be, Bentley is carrying explosive ammos by default in this game, and not sleep darts. This means that you can just blow up these walls by shooting them with the binocucom. Let's talk a bit about the binocucom in this game. So as you know, Sanzaru Games notoriously changed or swapped the controls for the binocucom, which means that right stick controls the movement and left stick controls the zoom. Here in this sewer section is Bentley. More often than not, you just have to tap right analog stick and immediately press R1 to shoot the explosive ammo, and then exit the binocular. Here you can also see me trying to collect these coins a bit here. It's quite important. We will gladly take all the free coins we can get in this run, since we're about to talk about the coin route very, very shortly. and this is basically the most pivotal part of the coin route.
Instant shortcut.
Hold up from the load. And now,
Next time,
here
I'm
you can
getting
see these
Sly
two
the
rats.
sewer job.
They might carry a loot with them, they both might carry a loot, or they may not. But basically this is the moment where the optimal coin route for this particular run that you are going through is defined. As Sly, you might have come across this one rat earlier, but this guy is a bit more unoptimal to loot compared to these two rats, and there's two rats as Bentley, and this is just one guy out here. In this game, there's only one obligatory power-up that you have to buy, and it's Paraglider, and it's unlocked instantly after completing this first job of the game, and it costs 100 coins. Now, in order to make progress in the game, it's not required until episode 3 and the job called Unexpected Ties, but already in the second job of episode 1, known as Breakout, this power-up saves quite a hefty chunk of time already. So we want to have that 100 coins before Breakout no matter what. It's quite difficult to get that 100 coins in Paris or even in the first job of episode 1 without going really out of your way to get more coins. You can gather up 50 coins, but not 100, so we basically need a loot. And here's the most optimal you're gonna get. And getting a loot here technically loses 7 seconds to not getting a loot, but we definitely need it. Guards in this game can carry loot that is worth either 100, 200 or 500 coins. So what if we would get a 500 loot from one of these rats? That would mean we would have quite a bit of extra compared to the 100 we would just need for the paraglider. So is there more we could buy? And the answer is yes. Here is a sheet of all the power-ups that are realistic to purchase in any scenario for an any percent run. When they are unlocked, how much time they save in each of the splits they can be used, and the total time save at the end. These times are listed in seconds. More expensive gadgets that are not realistic to get are not listed here. So the power-up that saves by far the most amount of time is Trigger Bomb for Bentley, 25 seconds, and since there are 2 gadgets listed for Bentley, the accumulative time save of both Trigger Bomb and Adrenaline Burst is also listed separately. Rail Sprint for Sly does have a few asterisks, so first off, in Juggling Act, the entire interior of the circus is cycle-based, so even though Rail Sprint on its own, if it would not be tied to cycles, would save a lot, like several seconds, it's technically not adding to anything. And in episode 5 Operation with Miss Decibel boss fight, it's possible to use Rail Sprint, but it's not taken into consideration at all. And of course, Charge Shot kinda obsoletes Autofire in a Mechanical Menace, so none of the coin routes and gadget routes that I will be presenting buys both of those. And also purchasing and equipping either of those 2 Carmelita power-ups loses 2.6 seconds on its own. So not a lot of time saved from power-ups, but that doesn't mean there are no possibilities to save time. Next up, here is the coin route. Here are the average coin amounts that you should get during every single split, leading up all the way to short supply, since after that split, it's not worth to buy anything anymore. Just the opening and closing animations of ThiefNet lose 3.8 seconds in total, so there's no room to play with after that point. So this would mean outside of getting loots or treasures or anything like that, you should have collected 800 coins by episode 3 Operation and 850 coins by Shell Shocked Heart without losing any time to single one of those coins. Most notable here, of course, is Duty Calls, where of course during a multi-minute auto-scroller you can farm plenty of coins. So here is your tool to keep track of your coin count and if you're getting coins or not. Additionally, with every loot you will also get 7 or 8 coins if you're looting small guards with 2 chunks. So the total value of a loot is technically like 107 or 108 coins based on the tier of the loots respectively. So based on the outcome what happens with these rats in Paris, you will get set on one of 3 possible routes. The fastest and the most optimal outcome is that you get a 500 coin tomato juice box loot. By getting this first try, this route saves 25 seconds over the only paraglider route. When I say first, second or third try, that is when I come from here and see if the guards have loot or not, and if they don't, I would choose to restart checkpoint in order to spawn those guards again and see if they would have loot this time around. This loses 9 to 10 seconds on average every time you do this. Other loots you can get are 200 gas grenade and 100 Swiss cheese. The 500 loot route saves about 8 seconds over the 100 and 200 loot routes. So what are actually the odds of getting a certain outcome? In this game, a guard can spawn with loot with 25% probability, but here Bentley faces 2 guards, so by the definition of a geometric distribution, the probability of at least one of these 2 rats spawning with loot is 44%. So 56% of the time you will not get a first try loot here. But what are the loot distributions? So when a guard spawns with loot, there's the same probability for that loot to be either 100 or 200 worth. The loot you'll get is either one of those with 45% probability rate. So that leaves only a 10% chance for you to get a 500 loot if a guard at all spawns with loot. So this means in total, when you roll to this hole as Bentley, 56% of the time there will not be loot at all. 20% of the time it'll be either 100 or 200 loot, and only 4% of the time the loot you get is 500 worth. So when doing runs, you really should not be going for that best RNG here and just take what you're given. Every second try when you restart checkpoint loses that about 9-ish, 10-ish seconds, depending on your reaction time. And with a really bad luck, you can end up restarting checkpoint over and over, adding up to like a minute of time loss, and at that point that's a reset. So at a top level I've used to reset here if I don't get a loot first try, unless it's a 500 loot. It's only like 3 minutes into the run anyways, it's not that big of a deal. But this makes the run quite tricky for marathon settings, don't you think? So what would be the most consistent but at the same time as fast as possible of an outcome to dodge this RNG setting and dodge the possibility of restarting checkpoint over and over again? Well, that is the third route option, which I only use for marathon runs, like Sly Factus. And instead of taking a loot in Paris, I'm opting to take a treasure in the first job of episode 1 instead. The treasure loses about 21 seconds, but as you can see from the comparison, this route as a whole is faster than a third try 100 or 200 loot, and just a bit slower than a third try 500 loot route, and slightly slower than a second try 100 and 200 loot route. And when we take the loot probabilities into consideration, the expected time loss for the Paris loot is 19 seconds, so it's only 2 seconds slower than the expected time loss on average to that loot. So here's what you do with certain outcomes. 500 loot route. So first, after completing photo op, buy paraglider and adrenaline burst. Inputs in a safe house are X up X. Then, after completing blind date, you buy rail sprint and auto fire. Inputs in a thief net are 2 down X, 9 up X, 1 up. This 1 extra up input is made in order to list trigger bomb as seen in a thief net. This will change the order of power-ups in the thief net the next time you visit it. Third visit, after completing duty calls, you buy trigger bomb. Inputs 4 up X, or alternatively up X. Then the 200/100 loot route. First, you buy paraglider only after completing photo op. You just mash X when you enter the thief net. Second visit, you buy adrenaline burst after completing under arrest in episode 2. The inputs are 1 up X and 4 up without buying anything else. This will just once again list trigger bomb as seen. And the third visit, after completing duty calls, inputs 1 up X. With these routes, if you get a shit ton of loots in duty calls, you can also buy rail sprint and charge shot, getting up to 4 seconds of realistic time save. And then finally, the treasure route. You won't get any loots first try, you're in a marathon setting, you can't reset. IMO, best way to go is with the treasure route by getting Gyro Slicer 2000 in photo op. This treasure is worth 301 coins. So the route, after completing photo op, once again, buy paraglider, just mash X in the thief net. Then, second visit, after completing Cooper for hire, you go and buy Trigger Bomb. The inputs are 8 times up and then X. And that's it. There are some minor branches in these coin routes, but we'll come back to that later. And let's go to the hack. These rats are one hit kill unless they spotted you before hitting them. And once again, with other loads, the load fade out in the hacks is quite lengthy, so it's even more important here to know where to aim from the load. From this first load, just hold up from the load until right before you can actually see where you're going, and then hold right. Here, instead of load screens and fade outs, you get transitions. So I'll describe them the same way I describe how to hold when exiting loads, since they're pretty much the same thing. Hold up in the next transition, and here you will come across the first firewall. Now, shooting these firewalls is quite slow, so we opt to dodge them. So as you can see, the firewall follows your movement, but it does it quite imperfectly. So if you just wiggle around right in front of the firewall, you can see it following your movement with a slight lag, and this will enable us to squeeze through it without actually shooting all the dots. So just wiggle yourself in front of the firewall and bait the wall to go into another direction. As you can see from this side of the screen, the detection of your own positioning is quite buggy. So the next transition, hold 11 o'clock and also aim to that direction. Now here there's a key behind that firewall, so of course we're gonna do the same exact thing again. The trigger areas for these data keys are quite huge, and they kind of vary between certain stations. So this is the first, the tutorial data key port, so you can see this is quite huge. I'm just yeah, see how far I was from the center? By knowing this, you can have a bit more optimal lines of movement that you would assume. Okay, let's go. Next stage, hold 7 o'clock. And another roll, another wiggle around. Here we got the tank, and this tank has double HP compared to the normal turret, so keep that in mind. You can tank quite a hefty amount of shots with it.
Ought to do the trick. The gate is open. Time to dock the ship.
Mash start in order to skip the cinematic after the load. Hold up from the load. So Murray has a bigger model, but he has the exact same unit speed things as does Sly and Bentley. Right here, a guard spawned in front of me with loot, but the disappointing fact is that Murray can't loot guards in this game unless he buys a power-up called Loot Shape worth 200, so that's kinda disappointing. Just run through a majority of these rats. The only ones you need to actually kill are the 3 ones here at the back, and just throw one of each other and just smash them on the ground and collect the coins. Next up, you get treated with an unskippable cutscene and a quick time event mashing section that you don't even need to mash that hard in order to go optimally. So hold 4 o'clock from the load, and you can see this trigger area is quite huge. One jump, throw, and wait for this other one to come down, throw. The important thing here is to wait for the barrel animation to end. So as you can see, I'm just mashing here. It won't pick up the barrel until the animation of another new battle coming down has completed. So here with this other one, you might think that that would connect, but it doesn't. So need to jump a bit inwards to the room in order for it to connect. This other battle, just take a few walking steps and then once again a bunch of unskippable cutscenes. You just have to press circle twice for the remaining of this entire job. Then there's an auto-scroller section 2 with the van, and that's it. Prologue tutorial done. Nice. Remember to be ready to mash circle when the fade out starts, since there will be a cinematic and those will be skipped by pressing the circle button. Another one will appear when entering episode 1 hub. When you get to the safe house, do not mash X. That'll take you to the freaking thief net. We're not buying paraglider yet. Instead, mash circle, and when you see the info pop-up screen start going away, that's when you start mashing X. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and all that sellout stuff, and we'll see you in the next one.